Hey, welcome back, friends. We're going to jump into this next lecture on disorientation and leading through liminality as we continue to move through the contextual intelligence framework. One of the pieces of uh, writings that I like to return to a lot is Vincent Donovan's Christianity Rediscovered. There's a lot of key ideas and fresh expressions that comes out of his work of kind of reassessing the whole missional approach. But in the beginning, actually in the forward, there's this really powerful phrase. Do not try to call them back to where they were, and do not try to call them to where you are, beautiful as that place may seem to you. You must have the courage to go with them to a place where neither you nor they have been before. The courage to go to a place that neither you nor them have been before. Vincent Donovan, if you don't know, he was a Catholic missionary who spent years with the Maasai people and was failing as a missionary of sharing Jesus or cultivating churches. And then he just had this revelation that the entire way he was taught and programmed to do it was wrong. And what he really needed to do was sit with the Maasai people and listen and build relationships and love and learn who God was to them, and then find bridges of connection and meaning between their conceptions of God and his. And that's really a powerful way to think about how we go about fresh expressions. And it's also, as we think about going through the CQ framework, the disorientation is knowing that we don't know everything, that we're going to a place we've never been before. The Spirit's going to lead us, but you can expect when we do anything with kingdom significance, there's going to be that hit the wall moment. There's going to be that death, cross, tomb, time moment where we started something, nobody's showing up, the ministry just doesn't seem to be working. We need to pull the plug. Uh, Things aren't working. Where are you, God? There's a lot of Psalms in there about crying out from the tomb. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? Why aren't you kicking my enemies' butts and those kind of things? And that's just built into this framework. And it's built into the incarnation of Jesus himself. So, um, disorientation really describes the state of having lost one's sense of direction and meaning. Organizationally speaking, it's living on the edge of chaos. I'll come back and say more about that, but it's this that riding the edge between stagnation and innovation, or new creation and nostalgia, going backwards. The Back to Egypt committee, oh, so great there, even though we were enslaved, but we had the leeks and the onions and the flesh pots, or pushing through the liminality toward the promised land, trusting God one day at a time. So this is really associated with Jesus' descent into the realm of the dead, and that's in the Philippians 2 point where obedient to the point of death, right? And what that meant for the disciples and the disorientation that that threw them into. Um, and really, what we're talking about here is faith to move in the right direction, even in the face of uncertainty, obedience to God, even when things don't seem like they make sense. And it is a really overlooked theological resource for the church. The 3 days that Jesus spends in the grave is a lot of important things happen on Holy Saturday, right? It's such a unutilized resource, but God doesn't just stop at the pain, the cross. That God enters into the place of death, enters into set the captives free, to proclaim good news even to the people in the place of Sheol. Jesus doesn't bail out on that. He weeps in the garden, he sweats blood. He has a condition called hematidrosis that happens under extreme duress, but he moves through that in faith and trust in the Father, and even into the point of death. In Romans 6 and Colossians 2, they don't just really kind of talk about the astonishing depth of God's love for us to go through that, right? But also they indicate our place in the tomb. The descent into the tomb is part of our journey as disciples, as learners of Jesus. It's part of our own spiritual maturation process. It's a move toward our own resurrection life, that whole death, take up your cross, follow me to be truly who you are. And this really it inverted the modern the ancient modern the ancient values of Roman society of honor, prestige, and power. It inverts them today in a culture where, Christian nationalism, people assume that that's like legit Christianity. They don't know it's a distortion of the faith. And this is a totally flipping those values kind of right side up. But the tomb forces us into this uncomfortable state of liminality and confusion. And we join with the disoriented disciples heading back to Emmaus, right? Making that walk. Well, we thought Jesus was the one, but apparently he wasn't, because everybody knows he wasn't supposed to die on a cross and ultimate shame, humiliated, hanging there naked, whipped, stripped, bleeding out slowly, and getting jammed with a Roman spear, right? And here it is, the third day, and these weird things took place. So the tomb represents that separation, that disorientation, that in-betweenness as we carry the cross, as we innovate, as we try new things. We hit that wall of disappointment and failure. Walter Brueggemann's got some really helpful thinking on this, where he talks about basically our human experience as being one of orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. Life is this flow of orienting, disorienting, reorienting. The orientation phase is like being securely rooted in something, having equilibrium, if you will. The disorientation refers to that equilibrium being thrown off, right? We're disoriented, we're dislocated. Reorientation refers to that surprising resurrection move of being reoriented back together, the new orientation, out of the old status quo, right, into this new reality. There's a really some really helpful thinking on this from anthropologist Victor Turner, who talks about the rituals of religion, right? And he really kind of talked about the ritual process that occurs that's marked by these three phases. So, Brueggemann talks about orientation, disorientation, reorientation. In sociology and anthropology, we talk about separation, margin, or the liminon, the threshold in Latin, and then the aggregation or the reaggregation. So the separation in any religious community is the first phase, detachment of the individual or group from an earlier point in the social structure or cultural conditions. The liminal, right, is the in-between period where the characteristics of the person become ambiguous as we pass through that in-between cultural realm. Not really in the past anymore, but not fully in that coming state. And then the reaggregation is that final phase. The ritual is consummated, the person or communities brought into a place of stability or equilibrium again. And by virtue of completing the ritual, they come into a new structural type, right? So all these religious rituals, people go out in the wilderness, do a walkabout, or all different kind of cultures and religions have these different ways of doing this. For Christianity, what is that? It's like baptism, right? And confirmation and going through that journey of being baptized into the community of faith, given a new name, new identity, new mission. In the Old Testament, it's the wilderness wandering in between Egypt and the Promised Land, right? So liminality from the Latin root limina, the threshold. It's that disorientation, that in-between space. We're not in that particular place anymore. We're not pre-ritual or post-ritual. We're simply in the in-betweenness, the threshold people. That we're not in a normal kind of categorization state. We're between the positions. The late theologian, author Alan Lewis wrote that, we kind of think of the second day as this no man's land, this anonymous moment, right? Counterfeit silence in the gospel story that has no meaning really, just waiting between, Good Friday and Easter Sunday. But actually, that day in between the days that's neither cross or resurrection, is a place of remembering the one and waiting for the other. And it's actually a really important phase of our spiritual life and journey. We might pass right over Jesus' time in the grave as a non-event, but we know significant things happen, right? Like his liberating of the harrowing of hell. Some of us who are creedal use the Apostles' Creed, and part of what we say, those of us who still keep it in the creed, he descended into hell, right? And he liberates the captives. What are the disciples doing during that time? Well, a cursory review of that, not much, or at least nothing to be proud of, right? They had a funeral of sorts. They're resting, they're waiting, they hid out. Some are doubted, our friend Thomas, right? Some lamented, they're holed up in a little room with the windows barred, the doors locked. They talked, they processed, they prayed. They formed relationships while they were waiting. They wrestled with the implications of what happened, like our friends on the road to Emmaus. But in actuality, that's a huge amount of activity, very important, essential activity. And this is a competency of contextually intelligent persons. Um, Jian Leica talks about, innovation, the design thinking approach, and how disorientation is an important part of that creative process. So defining problems in the obvious conventional ways leads to obvious conventional solutions, right? Or this is attributed to Albert Einstein. He said something like it, but not how it gets quoted all over the place. But you can't solve thinking at the level that created it, right? So going through a state of liminality and disorientation helps us ask more interesting questions, come up with more original ideas. Um, the risk of it is that sometimes teams get hung up exploring the problem, while action-oriented managers might be too impatient. They don't want to take time to figure out things and ask new questions. So she really highlights the essential points regarding contextual intelligence, asking the right questions and timing. These are two like parts of the CQ kind of competency. Um, Asking the wrong questions is going to get you the wrong answers. Measuring the wrong things is going to get you the wrong results. And understanding the timing of things, there's that chronos time, there's that kairos time, and understanding God's timing on things. So in the tomb time, disciples are asking lots of questions, hard but good questions, like, was Jesus really the one? How could he die on a cross? This isn't how we thought it was going to go. What does this mean? Let's go home and go fishing, right? Peter and company. Can a person executed on the cross really be the Messiah? Is the Messiah somebody we thought was going to be executed on the Roman crossbeam, right? The staras, the ultimate form of punishment and humiliation. Are we going to be executed now too? So the timing was essential to their activity. So if you think about it, we think of them being cowards, holed up in the little room, hiding out. But in another sense, if they went right back out, right, and started telling people about Jesus again and rushed headlong into the streets without this window of like waiting on Jesus to show up, it was a powder keg. They probably would have all actually been killed, executed, crucified, arrested, whatever. They were trying to stamp out the movement, right? So that waiting period, holding up, barring, fear, yes, all of those things. Can we blame them for being afraid? But there's a critical window in there, and I call that the tomb time. In anything that we're starting, a fresh expression, a new ministry, a new worship experience, whatever, there's this time of consciously pausing to diagnose our context through the three lens of hindsight, insight, and foresight. I'm going to share more about that later, but the hindsight looking back, insight being present in the moment, foresight asking what God's doing to our future. But when we're in that place of powerlessness, uh, we're in a place of prayer and we're in a place of waiting on God to do what only God can do. That's where the disciples were in that moment. They could only wait for Jesus to show up. Michael Polanyi, one of my favorite people, a hazing ritual for my students to read his personal knowledge book, which is pretty dense and complicated, but really fruitful if you press through it. But he refers to how unfinished tasks when we have this time that preoccupy us unconsciously, and after a period of silence and not thinking about those things, a solution can seemingly come to us. So built into our mental life is this tomb time where you ever get stuck on something, but then you take a walk or you just go do something else, and then you have a epiphany, right? And it opens your mind to a new possibility. Polanyi writes about it much better than I can articulate it. But the fact that our intellectual strivings make effective progress during a period of incubation without any effort on our part is in line with the latent character of knowledge. And just so you know, his big thing is personal knowledge. All knowledge is personal knowledge. You can't have an unbiased, unadulterated perspective on anything because we're humans and we bring all of that. And he talks about this kind of latent, tacit knowledge that we carry in our bodies, that somehow you just know things sometimes. And for each step, whether spontaneous or contrived, that brings us nearer to the solution, increases our premonition of the solution's proximity. It brings us into a more concentrated effort on this reduced logical gap. So pausing, waiting, praying, living, sitting in the tomb time and the disorientation can actually help our minds, our souls, our bodies open to new things. And when we're faced with a new challenge, a period of incubation in which we rest from effort of discovering the solution can help us move through the gap. I'm preaching to the choir here, but usually, like adventure, entrepreneur type people aren't good at this. We want to jump to the next thing. Like we can't sit in the irresolved nature of it. We would take the next hill, move to the next thing. And this really makes us slow down, stop, sit in it, wait on God to show up. And that dormancy can actually, the lack of purposeful energy can be a necessary stage in the process of discovery. It highlights the value of tomb time. So disorientation, maybe God doesn't want us to jump to shortcuts and quick fix solutions. I've seen really harmful things in my own ministry come out of that when we just kind of jump and um, try to do the shortcut, right? This doesn't mean you don't continue to iterate or prototype forward things. It's more about as you do that, stopping when something's not working or noticing that you're in a place of disorientation and just sitting with that, praying, asking different questions, right? And perhaps God's calling us to lay down with Him in the tomb for a while. Like, just hole yourself up, roll the stone, sit with me in the tomb, rest, reflect, ask new questions, acknowledge our powerlessness and our ultimate reliance on His intervention. And here's the key thing. The disciples couldn't do anything until Jesus showed up and breathed on them and sent them and restored them, right? And we're anything we do of significance, we're going to hit that point where all we can do is kind of wait on Jesus to show up. Amen. So what if we were to take on a posture of vulnerability and witness alongside the sufferer in our own suffering, join the weeping agony of a watching and waiting world? So doing tomb time, 3D thinking. This comes from there's a guy, Matthew Cutts, wrote a book on contextual intelligence, and he talks about the 3D thinking model, where hindsight, Hegel warned, the understanding always comes after the event. So think about, you say hindsight being 2020, right? So what that means, when we look back, we can say, oh, that was so obvious back there, right? That hindsight lens helps us see things as they really were in that time. And sometimes that comes too late. Like we blow it, we make a mistake, we can't go back. Insight is about paying attention, being intuitive, sitting in the moment, being that whole mindfulness kind of idea, contemplative spirituality, being present, um, with intuitive knowledge and empirical knowledge, gaining a depth of perception. But it's that kind of third eye kind of idea. The insight brings together a bird's eye view and a frog's eye view, the hologram kind of 3D view, right? And then foresight is about uh, grabbing the rope of hope that God has thrown from the future, that asking what has God said about our future, or charting our course based on the new creation and what God says is the ultimate finality, the ultimate eschatology of things. and trying to then behave in ways that make that future a reality now in our present. So foresight is about looking forward, projecting in the future from the past, but prophesying our way forward. It's that feedback loop from the future, asking, what does Revelation 21 and 22 look like that my community doesn't look like? What do I do to make my community look more like Revelation 20, 21 and 22 now, right? I like to use in Hebrews, there's this powerful image of Jesus, the anchor of our hope, right? That Jesus has pierced the veil. He's the anchor that's before us. We're kind of holding on to the rope. Sailors use this tactic called kedging, right? Where if you have adverse weather conditions or your vessel's not moving, you take a little rowboat, bring the anchor out in front of you, drop it, and then you pull the bigger vessel forward by the anchor of the little boat. That's called kedging. And all of our faith journey is about kedging our way forward, grabbing the rope of hope that's anchored in Christ and moving forward. And that's kind of that foresight kind of lens. When we're in that disorientation space and we lost our bearings and we're in the tomb time, we have to ask a question, right? To default or pivot. We either default back to the old reality, we go back to the old mental model, or we stay with the disorientation, we move forward. So the whole wilderness wandering is a example of this, right? Do we go back to Egypt? It was so great there, right? Or do we keep pressing forward, eating this manna every day, going towards the promised land? And mental models are, again, this is Peter Singe's work around these deeply held internal images of how the world works, and they limit us actually in our familiar patterns of thought and action. So the mental models determine how we make sense of our environments, how we see, but also how we act. Some of the best ideas fail, and brilliant strategies never get translated to action because the old mental model wins out, even though the new thing is showing to be effective. We'll go back to the old way of knowing things. So the final thing to say about this edge of chaos idea, the disorientation tomb time space, it's like we're riding the edge of chaos. And if we have too much chaos, there's high uncertainty, randomness, things fall apart, people can't live with it, right? This is an organizational framework for this, by the way. There's on the other side of things, the other extreme is the rigidity, the a high constraint, no novelty, no innovation, pull into that. We just fall back into the nostalgia, into the status quo. Riding the edge of chaos is staying with the disorientation, staying with the tomb time, staying in the liminality so new things can be created. There's this polarity map too, where you have the old thinking, new thinking, right? And there's a danger with both. If you go too far into autonomy, trust, I mean, some of the positives of it are autonomy, trust, empowerment, transparency. But if you go too far into that, you have anarchy, confusion, chaos, errors. On the other side of things, one of the values, one of the positives of the old models of thinking, leadership, performance, accountability, clarity. But if you go too far with that, the negatives of that are tyranny, bureaucracy, politics, death by committee, stagnation, no new thing, no innovation, no new ideas. So there's this kind of riding in the middle, contextual intelligence kind of moves through that disorientation. There are wicked problems in the world, and this is wicked not in the sense of it's bad or evil or not good. It's not a moral statement of wickedness. It's about problems that are so complex and so interwoven in the social fabric of life that they're not going to be resolved in our life, right? But all of us have wicked problems. All of us have things that we notice, right? That sometimes come out of our own experience, our own trauma, our own situations. Like for me, substance abuse disorder and overdose, which claimed my little brother's life and has claimed so many people's life in our ministry. That's a wicked problem for me. I will not solve that probably in my life, but I will certainly give myself to it every day that I can to be part of the solution toward it. And we maybe all have those. The CQ Mandorla ring, so it's kind of this sweet spot of where the so be there with all is kind of our idea here. and all being the cosmos, all being all people, all being this fully inclusive vision of God's new creation, right? So the content is fixed, right? Um, for instance, the gospel of Jesus Christ, there's a fixed element of that, there's a seed of that. The context, the there-ness, right, is in flux, always changing. Remember, clouds, not clocks. The connection is the flow of energy, right? The withness in between, bringing the content and the context together. There's that mandorla of withness. Before we can ever be a witness, we have to be a withness. And in that sweet spot where we bring together the content, the context, the connection, going particular to redeem universally, remember that Jesus of Nazareth. When we love our particular community, when we bring together the content, the context, the hermeneutic, the semiotic, together in the sweet spot, committed to this place, these people with these real names, real struggles, real joys and hopes. That's that kind of sweet spot of the CQ mandorla there that brings it all together. So the content, to simplify this, is the word became flesh, Jesus, right? The context, Jesus of Nazareth, particular time, particular place. The connection, his name is God with us, withness, right? And in Jesus, all things, the cosmos holds together and have their being and move in him, right? Bringing that all together, thinking about if you a little helpful kind of frame as you think about contextual intelligence, be there with all content, context, connection, cosmos. Hey, thanks for tuning in to this module, this lecture. Appreciate you, and I will see you soon.